Along the quiet shores of western India, where the restless waves of the Arabian Sea meet the rugged coastline of Gujarat, lies a city whose name echoes through millennia, Dwarka. Today it is a modest town, but within its soil, its stones, and its very name are buried the remnants of a story so old that it predates recorded history, a story interwoven with myth, shaped by faith, and pursued by science. To the devout, Dwarka is sacred. To the historian, it is a puzzle, and to the archaeologist, it is a tantalizing mystery submerged beneath centuries of tide and time. The word Dwarka comes from the Sanskrit dwar, meaning door or gateway. It is often referred to in ancient texts as Dwaravati, the gateway to the heavens. But for millions across India and the wider Hindu world, it is not just a poetic metaphor. Dwarka is believed to have been the legendary kingdom of Krishna, a central figure in the Mahabharata and the Bhagavad Purana, texts that form the spiritual and cultural backbone of much of South Asia. According to these scriptures, Krishna was not merely a spiritual guide or a philosopher. He was a prince, a strategist, and a statesman, and it was he who is said to have established the grand city of Dwarka. As the legend goes, after leaving his native Mathura, a city beset by warfare and political upheaval, Krishna led his people westward. He sought a place of peace and prosperity far from the invasions that plagued the heartland. He arrived at the western edge of the subcontinent, to a remote coastline where the land met the sea. And there, with the help of divine forces, he built a new city. The Mahabharata describes this city in exquisite detail, a marvel of urban planning, constructed in mere days by Vishwakarma, the divine architect of the gods. Dwarka was said to be fortified with high walls, lined with grand boulevards, adorned with lush gardens and ornate palaces. Its harbor welcomed ships from far-off lands, while its temples rang with the sound of bells and sacred chants. The city glittered, quite literally, in gold, silver, and precious stones. But Dwarka was not to last forever. In time, the great war of Kurukshetra came and went. Krishna's role in that war, as a divine charioteer and a moral guide, is immortalized in the Bhagavad Gita. Yet, after the war, and after the gradual disintegration of the Yadava clan, Krishna's own people, the city fell into decline. Then, according to legend, as Krishna departed the earthly realm, the sea began to rise. The ocean crept inland and consumed Dwarka. Buildings were swept away, palaces vanished under waves, and the city was lost to time. For centuries, this account was regarded as allegory, a beautiful story with moral significance, certainly, but with little expectation of historical accuracy. After all, where were the ruins? Where was the evidence? But myths, as it turns out, are often anchored, if only faintly, in memory, and memory has a way of enduring, especially in the oral traditions of ancient cultures. For generation after generation, the people of Gujarat, fishermen and priests alike, whispered that their coastal town sat upon the bones of something older. They spoke of submerged temples visible during low tides, of stone steps that led into the sea, and of structures that no one could explain, and relics that washed ashore after storms. These whispers, dismissed for centuries, would later become the focus of serious academic attention, and with the advent of modern technology, sonar imaging, underwater archaeology, and sediment analysis, the possibility that Dwarka was more than a myth began to take shape. But even before these modern efforts, long before the first scuba tanks were strapped on, Dwarka had already achieved something profound. It had survived, not in walls and buildings, perhaps, but in memory, in scripture, and in ritual. The city had become more than a physical place. It was now an idea, a symbol of divine governance, of perfect urbanity, and of a golden age lost to the tides of time. To this day, thousands make pilgrimages to Dwarka, not merely to see the temples or to touch the waters of the Gomti River, but to connect with the layered legacy of a city that exists somewhere between fact and faith. And so the question lingers, what if Dwarka really did exist? What if, beneath the sediment and the seaweed, the remains of this city still rest, waiting to be brought back into the light? In the chapters that follow, we will explore that question. We will journey through scripture, sift through archaeological evidence, and travel both on land and underwater. Not to prove or disprove a myth, but to understand how a city lost to the sea became one of the most enduring legends of the ancient world. Chapter 2. If we are to understand Dwarka, truly understand it, we must begin not with stone, but with story. Not with what we can excavate, but with what we have remembered. For over 2000 years, the primary accounts of Dwarka have come not from inscriptions or ruins, but from the epics, the vast, intricate, and multi-layered texts that form the literary and spiritual foundation of Hindu civilization. Two texts in particular offer us the earliest and most detailed descriptions of Dwarka, the Mahabharata and the Harivamsa. The Mahabharata is not merely an epic poem. At over 100,000 verses, it is one of the longest works of literature in the world. Within its sweeping narrative of dynasties, wars, ethics, and destiny, the figure of Krishna stands apart, not just as a divine being, but as a practical leader, one who navigates politics, alliances, and the responsibilities of statecraft. According to the Mahabharata, after repeated conflicts with the tyrannical king Kansa, and later with powerful adversaries like Jarasandha of Magad, Krishna saw that the safety of his people in Mathura could no longer be guaranteed. Faced with mounting threats, he made a bold decision to abandon the ancestral capital and lead his people westward, to a land untouched by conflict. There, on the banks of the Gomti River, by the edge of the sea, he resolved to build a new city, a haven, a fortress, a capital unlike any other. To accomplish this task, Krishna summoned Vishwakarma, the divine architect of the gods. This is no casual reference. Vishwakarma is a mythological figure associated with the construction of heaven itself, with divine weapons and celestial cities. His involvement suggests that Dwarka was meant to be not just a place of refuge, but a model of celestial perfection brought to earth. The Harivamsa, often considered an appendix or supplement to the Mahabharata, goes further. It describes the city in rich architectural terms: 12 gates, 900,000 palaces adorned with crystal and emerald, roads wide enough for chariots, and docks lined with ocean-going vessels. It speaks of gardens, fountains, assembly halls, and high walls that kept enemies at bay. Most striking, however, is not the opulence, but the order. Dwarka was described as a place where governance was efficient, justice was swift, and society flourished. It was a city not only of wealth but of balance, of dharma, the righteous order of things. Krishna, we are told, ruled wisely from this city. His court was made up of wise counselors, warriors, and sages. The city prospered not in isolation but as a hub of trade, diplomacy, and learning. Foreign merchants came to its ports. Cultural exchanges took place. For a time, Dwarka was the beating heart of a vast and diverse civilization. But like all cities in epic literature, Dwarka too was destined to fall. The epics tell us that after the great war of Kurukshetra, a cataclysmic conflict that brought even the gods into the affairs of men, the Yadava clan, Krishna's own people, began to decline. Internal strife, pride, and the curse of a sage unraveled what had once been a united kingdom. Then, in one of the most haunting passages in the Harivamsa, it is said that the sea claimed the city. The earth trembled, the foundations cracked, ocean waves surged inland, and the city of Dwarka, once a symbol of divine perfection, was consumed by the very sea that had embraced it. There is no triumph in this ending, only a profound sense of impermanence. Even the city of the gods, the city built with divine hands, could not resist the forces of time and nature. To scholars and skeptics, these passages have long been treated as metaphor, symbolic of the inevitable decline of civilizations or the moral costs of pride and war. But to believers, and increasingly to some archaeologists, these descriptions hint at something more, that perhaps there was once a city here whose sudden disappearance gave rise to a legend that would live on for thousands of years. And there is one more curious detail. The epics place Dwarka precisely where modern-day Dwarka stands. This geographical consistency, repeated across texts and traditions, has intrigued historians. In a world where oral stories tend to drift, the location of Dwarka has remained strangely stable. Again and again, texts point to the confluence of river and sea, to the western coast, to the region we now call Gujarat. Could this be a coincidence? Or could it be a memory, resilient, transmitted across generations, masked in poetry but rooted in experience? These are the questions that have led many to look beyond the texts, not to dismiss them, but to test them. Because if the scriptures were right about the location, what else might they have been right about? In the next chapter, we'll follow the path of those who dared to find out. From colonial era explorers to 20th century marine archaeologists, the search for the lost city of Dwarka moves from story to sediment, from verse to verification. Chapter 3. For centuries, the story of Dwarka remained just that, a story. Beautiful, resonant, but ultimately unproven. Ancient texts painted vivid images of a golden city by the sea, swallowed by waves. Yet, to the world outside the tradition of the epics, there was no concrete proof, no ruins, no inscriptions, no definitive artifacts. It remained, in the eyes of most historians and archaeologists, a sacred myth, a symbolic tale with moral weight, but little historical substance. But stories, especially those told and retold across generations, have a way of enduring, and sometimes they leave behind faint fingerprints, subtle marks waiting to be noticed. In India, belief in the historical reality of Dwarka never fully disappeared. Even as academic consensus leaned toward skepticism, fishermen and local priests in Gujarat told stories of submerged temples visible during low tide. Divers, pearl hunters, and coastal villagers spoke of stone steps beneath the sea, of temple bells heard faintly through water, and of unusual formations just off the coast. These stories were largely dismissed by colonial era scholars, who considered them examples of folklore rather than historical testimony. But by the mid 20th century, a shift began. The discipline of marine archaeology, that is, the study of submerged ruins, shipwrecks, and ancient coastal settlements, was developing rapidly. With new technologies like echo sounders, sonar scanners, and improved scuba equipment, it was now possible to look beneath the sea with far greater clarity than ever before. In India, one of the first to seriously propose that Dwarka might have a basis in history was Dr. S. R. Rao, a pioneering archaeologist with the Archaeological Survey of India, a man of both scientific training and cultural literacy. Rao had led excavations at numerous Indus Valley sites, including Lothal, a key ancient port city in Gujarat. It was Rao who first asked, publicly and methodically, what if the ancient texts were not entirely fictional? What if the sea had indeed engulfed a real city? And what if it could still be found, not in books, but in the seabed itself? With that guiding question, the search began in earnest. Starting in the early 1960s and picking up pace in the 1980s, Dr. Rao and his team conducted preliminary surveys of the coastal waters near the modern town of Dwarka. These were painstaking efforts. Equipment was limited. Diving conditions were difficult. Visibility was often poor, but the rewards were remarkable. Divers began finding stone blocks and architectural fragments, some showing signs of carving and alignment. Most notably, they discovered a series of triangular and circular anchors, similar in style to those used in ancient maritime cultures. These were not modern debris. They suggested the presence of a once active port, one that had long since fallen below the waterline. Further investigations uncovered walls, steps, and foundation-like structures arranged in geometric patterns. These submerged ruins lay several meters underwater and in some cases extended for hundreds of meters along the seabed. Sonar imaging revealed linear formations, possible streets, enclosures, or fortifications. In one stretch, divers found what appeared to be a jetty or landing platform built with precision-cut stones, suggesting an ancient harbor installation. Rao and his colleagues proposed that these were the remains of ancient Dwarka. While not all agreed with the claim, the finds were impossible to ignore. Meanwhile, farther south in the Gulf of Kambat, another underwater exploration added fuel to the fire. In the early 2000s, the National Institute of Ocean Technology, NIOT, conducted a marine survey using side-scan sonar and dredging equipment. What they reported was startling. A submerged city-like formation covering several square kilometers with what looked like roads, basins, and right-angled structures. Artifacts retrieved from the site included pottery shards, stone tools, and fossilized human remains. Preliminary radiocarbon dating yielded surprisingly early dates, in some cases as far back as 7500 BCE. If confirmed, this would make it one of the oldest known urban settlements in the world. But here, the controversy deepened. Many scientists questioned the dating methods, the reliability of the dredging context, and whether the sonar images actually showed man-made structures or simply natural rock formations. The findings from the Gulf of Combat remain debated to this day. Still, the central question refused to go away. Was there a submerged city off the coast of Gujarat? And could that city be the one remembered in India's oldest texts? The Indian government took notice. Further funding was allocated. Marine archaeological units were formed. The quest to uncover the true story of Dwarka became not only a scientific pursuit but a cultural endeavor, bridging tradition and technology. For the first time, a myth long dismissed as allegory was now being considered in the light of sonar scans and sediment analysis. And while many academics urged caution, few denied that something had once existed here, something old, something submerged, and something waiting to be understood. And so, what began as a story in the scriptures had become a search through the silt. And in the process, the boundary between legend and history began to blur. In the next chapter, we dive deeper, literally, into what lies beneath the waves. We examine what has been discovered underwater, how it has been interpreted, and what it might tell us about the lost city of Dwarka. Chapter 4. As the waves lap gently against the shores of Gujarat, most visitors to modern Dwarka see only what stands above the surface: temples, ghats, the bustle of pilgrim rituals. But just a few kilometers offshore, beneath the waters of the Arabian Sea, lies a much older and more mysterious world, a world of stone and silence, a world long hidden until divers and sonar reveal it, piece by patient piece. It is here, beneath the sea, that the story of Dwarka begins to take shape, not as poetry or scripture, but as physical evidence, as geometry, alignment, artifact, and stratification. The earliest underwater expeditions near modern Dwarka began in earnest in the 1980s, under the direction of archaeologist Dr. S.R. Rao, with support from the Marine Archaeological Unit of the National Institute of Oceanography. Their goal? To determine whether the submerged remains observed by local divers could be part of the legendary city described in the ancient texts. The discoveries came slowly, over years of painstaking exploration. Divers began to identify structures lying at depths of between 3 and 12 meters. These were not random stones. They appeared to be dressed and placed, cut into regular shapes, laid out in straight alignments, sometimes forming right-angled corners. Wall-like structures emerged from the seabed, as well as platforms, rectangular enclosures, and steps that seemed to descend towards the seafloor. In some areas, the stones were laid in layers, using techniques suggestive of foundation building. Some appeared to have slots or holes, possibly for wooden beams, suggesting the remnants of once standing structures. Divers also discovered stone anchors, ranging in shape from prismatic to triangular. These were unmistakably man-made, bearing similarities to anchors used in the ancient Mediterranean and Indian Ocean trade routes. Several had holes drilled into them for mooring ropes, and many were found in clusters, suggesting the presence of an ancient harbor or docking area. These finds were not isolated. Over time, researchers mapped a wide area of submerged ruins stretching over several kilometers. Using side-scan sonar and sub-bottom profilers, they documented underwater features that bore resemblance to urban planning: grids, rectilinear layouts, and parallel alignments. Some formations appeared to run perpendicular to one another, such as like streets and alleys in a planned city. Pottery shards and tools were also retrieved from the seabed, although dating them with precision has proven difficult. Still, some carbon samples from nearby organic material suggested occupation dates ranging from 1500 BCE to earlier, possibly as far back as the late Harappan period. But perhaps the most provocative discovery occurred not off the coast of Dwarka, but further south in the Gulf of Kambat. In 2001, a joint survey by the National Institute of Ocean Technology and the Geological Survey of India detected what appeared to be a massive submerged city-like structure beneath 30 to 40 meters of water. Sonar images from the Kambat site revealed an area nearly 9 kilometers long and 2 kilometers wide, containing geometric shapes suggestive of buildings, causeways, and reservoirs. The formations were aligned in grids. In some areas, sonar indicated rectangular blocks that measured with a level of symmetry rarely found in natural formations. Artifacts retrieved from this site included carved stones, microlithic tools, pottery fragments, and even what appeared to be fossilized human remains embedded in ancient soil. Samples sent for radiocarbon dating returned dates as early as 7500 BCE, causing a wave of excitement and controversy within both the archaeological community and the public. If verified, these dates would predate not only the Mahabharata but also the earliest known cities of Mesopotamia, Egypt, and the Indus Valley. Such a city, if real, would represent a civilization unknown to current historical models. However, these claims remain contested. Several experts have raised concerns about the context of the findings. The underwater currents in the Gulf of Kambat are among the most turbulent in India. Visibility is often near zero. Sediment layers shift frequently. As a result, critics argue that the artifacts may have been deposited by rivers or erosion, rather than being part of an intact urban site. Others question whether the sonar images depict man-made structures or merely geological formations, ridges, faults, and rock layers shaped by natural forces. Until further in situ excavation is possible, and until artifacts can be linked clearly to their architectural context, doubts will remain. Nonetheless, the cumulative evidence from both Dwarka and Kambat has made one thing clear. Ancient human activity did take place here on a scale that suggests urban organization and maritime trade. The presence of anchors, harbor features, and foundations supports the idea that this region was once a thriving port settlement, potentially linked to larger cultural networks. Combined with textual references from the Mahabharata and Harivamsa, the archaeological discoveries hint at a convergence of myth and material, an overlap that, while not conclusive, is too strong to ignore. Yet, for every answer these discoveries provide, more questions arise. Was this the actual Dwarka of Krishna, or a different port city later wrapped in legend? Was it truly submerged by a catastrophic sea rise, as the scriptures suggest, or was it gradually abandoned and overtaken by erosion and time? And most fundamentally, how do we define a city as real when its memory has lived in stories longer than in stone? As the tide continues to rise and fall over the sunken ruins, the search for Dwarka remains ongoing, part history, part archaeology, part cultural introspection. In the next chapter, we'll explore the debates and disagreements that have surrounded these discoveries. From academic skepticism to national pride, we examine why Dwarka has become more than just an archaeological site. It has become a battleground for how we tell the story of India's past. Chapter 5. In archaeology, as in ancient history, discovery is only the beginning. The more compelling the find, the greater the scrutiny it draws. And when the discovery involves a city that bridges the realms of myth and memory, like Dwarka, the scrutiny is intense. The underwater findings near Dwarka and in the Gulf of Kambat sparked not only excitement but also controversy, igniting debates across academic, religious, and political spheres. At the heart of the debate is this: can a city described in mythological scripture be considered a historical site? And if so, under what conditions do we balance textual tradition with empirical science? For some archaeologists, the discoveries made by Dr. S.R. Rao and subsequent teams represent a tantalizing possibility: a submerged city off the western coast of India with artifacts and features that may correspond to descriptions in ancient texts. The presence of stone anchors, dressed blocks, and linear foundations offshore suggests that there was significant maritime activity here, perhaps dating back thousands of years. But others, including prominent international researchers and marine geologists, caution against jumping to conclusions. They raise important points. Natural formations on the seafloor, such as basaltic lava flows, sedimentary fractures, and coral growth, can sometimes resemble human made structures when viewed in low visibility conditions or through sonar scans. Anchors, while clearly man made, could belong to any number of ancient coastal settlements. Their presence alone does not confirm a direct connection to Krishna's Dwarka or any specific literary reference. The pottery and tools retrieved from the seabed often come from dredged or disturbed contexts. Without being excavated in situ, meaning in their original position, it becomes difficult to determine whether they were part of a submerged settlement or carried there by water and erosion from elsewhere. The radiocarbon dating from the Gulf of Kambat, which yielded extraordinarily early dates such as 7500 BCE, is particularly contentious. Critics argue that the samples tested were not securely tied to man-made structures. Organic material can drift across seabeds, and marine sediment layers can be disrupted by strong currents, especially in the turbulent waters of that gulf. In short, skeptics do not necessarily dispute that structures and artifacts have been found. They question whether they represent the city of Dwarka as described in the Mahabharata, or whether they are remnants of unrelated coastal activity from a different era entirely. These are not minor disagreements. At stake is a much broader issue: the credibility of mythological sources as historical evidence. India's ancient texts, including the Mahabharata and the Harivamsa, are poetic, complex, and multi-layered. They include genealogies, cosmologies, moral dilemmas, theological discourses, and city descriptions rich in detail. Some historians argue that these texts contain kernels of historical memory, though often wrapped in symbolic or allegorical language. Others remain more cautious. They point out that Dwarka's location, layout, and destruction narrative may serve mythic functions, symbolizing spiritual loss, the impermanence of human achievements, or the cyclical nature of time. Yet, it is precisely this ambiguity, this overlap of belief and archaeology, that has made Dwarka such a sensitive subject in India's cultural discourse. In recent decades, the issue has moved beyond academic journals and scientific circles. It has become entangled with questions of national identity, religious sentiment, and historical interpretation. Some proponents of Dwarka's historicity view its possible discovery as a vindication of India's ancient wisdom, a testament to the continuity of civilization and the accuracy of traditional texts. For them, each submerged wall and carved anchor is seen not only as an archaeological object but as evidence of cultural truth passed down through generations. Critics, however, warn that archaeology must remain disciplined and dispassionate. They fear that allowing religious or political agendas to shape interpretations can lead to pseudo-history, where data is selectively cited or exaggerated to serve ideology. Indeed, Dwarka has at times become a flashpoint in India's ongoing debates over how its history should be told. Should it emphasize ancient continuity and indigenous greatness? Should it foreground scientific skepticism and secular rigor? Or can both positions coexist? Amid these tensions, many archaeologists and researchers urge a balanced approach. They argue that Dwarka should not be dismissed outright as myth, nor should it be declared conclusively historical without further evidence. Instead, they advocate for more data, more controlled excavations, and more international collaboration, so that conclusions are based not on belief or disbelief but on verifiable findings. What is undeniable, however, is that something lies beneath the waters near Dwarka, whether it is the legendary city of Krishna or a lesser known ancient port now lost to time. The submerged ruins speak to a chapter of history we are only beginning to understand. In the next chapter, we will look at what we do know, the evidence for Dwarka as a center of ancient maritime trade. For whatever else it was, the city that once stood on the coast played a role in the vast and dynamic web of oceanic commerce that stretched from Africa to Arabia and beyond. Chapter 6. In the modern imagination, ancient India is often visualized as a land of temples, rivers, and inland empires. But for much of its history, India was also a maritime civilization, its people shaped by oceans as much as by mountains or plains. And Dwarka, perched on the western edge of the subcontinent, played a key role in that oceanic story. Long before it became a spiritual symbol or a subject of archaeological debate, Dwarka was a port city, a gateway not just to the divine, as its name suggests, but to the wider world across the Arabian Sea. The geography makes this clear. The Kathiawar Peninsula, on which Dwarka stands, juts out prominently into the Arabian Sea. It offers natural protection from inland threats and access to rich maritime routes. Its coastline is studded with inlets, estuaries, and sheltered bays, ideal conditions for anchoring ships and building harbors. Even today, remnants of tidal creeks and ancient jetties can be seen in the landscape, hinting at a time when the sea came further inland and when shipping lanes passed directly through what is now dry land. The discovery of stone anchors and possibly jetty structures near Dwarka is among the strongest archaeological evidence supporting its role as a maritime hub. These anchors, ranging in shape from triangular to mushroom-like, suggest vessels of significant size and long-distance capability. Their typology bears resemblance to those found in ancient Mediterranean and Red Sea sites, suggesting possible technological convergence or shared maritime knowledge. But evidence of maritime trade comes not just from stone. Ancient literary sources also hint at a bustling sea trade from India's western shores. The Periplus of the Erythraean Sea, a Greco-Roman maritime guide written in the 1st century CE, describes trading ports along the western coast of India. It mentions the exchange of spices, textiles, ivory, gemstones, and perfumes, all commodities known to originate from or pass through Gujarat. While the text does not mention Dwarka by name, its descriptions of ports in the region align geographically with where Dwarka is located today. In addition to Greek and Roman accounts, Indian texts too suggest active sea travel. The Jataka tales, Buddhist stories written around the same time, speak of voyages from western India to Sri Lanka and Southeast Asia. Inscriptions from ancient port cities such as Bharuch, just a few hundred kilometers south of Dwarka, reveal evidence of trade networks stretching to Egypt, the Persian Gulf, and East Africa. It is reasonable to infer that a port city as strategically positioned as Dwarka would have been part of these networks. The sea, in those times, was not a barrier, it was a highway. Goods moved along monsoon winds. Traders, pilgrims, scholars, and sailors crossed from port to port. Ports like Dwarka would have served not only as economic centers but also as cultural contact points, places where languages, scripts, religions, and technologies met and mingled. Archaeological surveys in nearby coastal regions have unearthed terracotta figurines, shell bangles, semi precious stone beads, and microbeads made from steatite, many of which were manufactured in Gujarat and traded across the Indian Ocean. The manufacturing of such items required specialized skills and suggests an organized economy with craft guilds, trade coordination, and possibly state oversight. The presence of such industries in and around Dwarka is supported by some inland finds, including those near Beth Dwarka, an island believed by some traditions to have been part of the original Dwarka kingdom. Surface surveys there have yielded pottery types associated with the late Harappan period and early historic times, indicating continuous habitation and trade. Taken together, these findings paint a picture of Dwarka not just as a religious capital or a mythical city, but as a functioning maritime port, integrated into both the local economy and wider interregional networks. This maritime perspective also adds dimension to the legend of Dwarka's submergence. A port city, after all, is always at the mercy of the sea. Any change in sea level, coastal erosion, or tectonic activity could have catastrophic effects. And in this light, the story of Dwarka's disappearance beneath the waves becomes more than symbolic, it becomes plausible. Port cities rise and fall with the rhythms of the coast. Their harbors silt up, their trade routes shift, their economies collapse under environmental stress, or they are simply lost to the sea as coastlines reshape over centuries. The notion of Dwarka as a real city, built for trade and administration, destroyed or submerged due to natural forces, is therefore not beyond reason. It fits within the broader patterns observed in other ancient coastal settlements around the world. Whether or not the city described in the Mahabharata is the same as the one now being studied under the sea, it is clear that the region of Dwarka was once connected to inland empires, to seaborne trade routes, and to a world far beyond the Indian subcontinent. In the next chapter, we return to the present. We visit the modern city of Dwarka, a place that continues to live in the shadow of its ancient namesake, a place where pilgrims gather, rituals endure, and the memory of the submerged city shapes the rhythms of daily life. Chapter 7. Today, on the windswept shores of Gujarat, Dwarka is once again a living city. But it is not the city of grand palaces and golden ramparts described in ancient texts, nor is it the entirely silent ruin imagined by archaeologists. It is something else, a city of memory, shaped as much by what lies beneath as by what stands above. Modern Dwarka is a small town by population, with fewer than 50,000 residents. Yet it holds a position of immense spiritual and cultural importance. It is one of the Char Dham, the four sacred pilgrimage destinations of Hinduism, believed to purify the soul and mark the four cardinal directions of India's sacred geography. Here, the past is not studied in textbooks alone, it is lived. Walk through the streets of Dwarka and you will find that history is never far. It echoes in the hymns sung at sunrise, in the temple bells that ring through the day, in the quiet offerings made by riverbanks and seaside shrines. The center of religious life in Dwarka is the towering Dwarkadhish temple, also known as the Jagat Mandir, the temple of the Lord of the universe. It rises above the town, its stone shikara crowned with a flag that is changed 5 times a day. This temple, dedicated to Lord Krishna, is believed by many to stand on the site of the original palace of the deity himself. The current structure dates primarily to the 15th and 16th centuries, rebuilt and restored over centuries of wear, conquest, and devotion. But beneath its foundation may lie older stones, remnants of earlier shrines and sanctuaries, built and rebuilt across time. The continuity of worship here is striking. Even when empires fell or coastlines shifted, the spiritual heart of Dwarka remained intact. The temple's architecture is a blend of Chalukya and Solanki styles, marked by carved pillars, sculpted panels, and stepped designs that echo older temple forms found across Western India. Pilgrims climb steep stairways to reach the sanctum. Inside, the idol of Krishna, clad in silk and adorned with garlands, is worshipped daily by priests who follow rituals passed down over centuries. Outside the temple complex, life continues with the rhythm of a pilgrimage town. Markets sell offerings, flowers, ghee lamps, conch shells, and religious icons. Small dharmshalas or pilgrim rest houses line the streets. Food stalls prepare simple vegetarian meals. The pace is slow and the atmosphere contemplative. Yet Dwarka is not only a destination for pilgrims, it is also a center of local heritage and maritime tradition. Many families in the town have lived here for generations. Some trace their lineage to priests, others to temple artisans, and still others to fishing communities who have long worked the coastal waters, navigating the same sea that, according to legend, once swallowed a kingdom. These local traditions are deeply rooted in the land and the sea. Fishermen speak of submerged temples visible during exceptionally low tides. Some have reported unusual stone formations or carved pillars caught in the nets. Oral histories, passed from elders to children, describe the sea's restless appetite and the idea that something ancient sleeps beneath its waves. This interweaving of belief and place gives modern Dwarka a dual identity. It is both a living town and a memory site. Pilgrims come not just to worship Krishna, but to connect with a larger story, the story of a city said to be founded by a god, lost to the ocean, and kept alive through faith. In recent years, local and national efforts have sought to preserve and promote Dwarka's heritage. Urban development plans include improved access for pilgrims and better conservation of historical structures. The Gujarat state government, in cooperation with cultural ministries, has supported limited archaeological work, both on land and offshore, to further explore Dwarka's legacy. At the same time, the town remains modest in size. Despite its spiritual fame, Dwarka has not transformed into a sprawling metropolis. In some ways, this is a blessing. It retains a sense of scale and timelessness, a place where the sacred and the ordinary still share the same streets. It is here, perhaps more than anywhere else, that the story of Dwarka comes full circle. It began as a city of myth, forged in the minds of poets and remembered in the hearts of devotees. It was submerged, forgotten, searched for, and debated. And yet, all along, a city named Dwarka continued to exist, quietly, persistently, beside the sea. In this way, the legacy of Dwarka is not limited to stone or scripture. It is also in the persistence of memory, in ritual that endures, in the simple act of lighting a lamp at dusk, facing the sea, and whispering a prayer to a god who once ruled a city said to be perfect, and who, in the minds of many, never truly left. In the next chapter, we explore this idea more deeply, how Dwarka challenges our understanding of time, history, and memory, and how a submerged city continues to shape India's imagination and identity. Chapter 8. As the sun sets over the Arabian Sea, casting long shadows on the temple spires of Dwarka, the city takes on a quiet stillness. It is a place where the past seems unusually close, where ancient names are still spoken, ancient paths still walked, and where time itself feels somehow layered. Dwarka is not just a city, it is an idea that has endured across centuries, transcending stone and sea, legend and reality, fact and faith. It is easy in the modern world to think of time as a straight line. One moment follows the next. One generation builds upon the last. Civilizations rise, decline, and are replaced. But the story of Dwarka reminds us that time is not always so linear. Sometimes it circles back. Sometimes it remains suspended, preserved not in structures but in memory. In this way, Dwarka represents something more than a vanished city. It represents a challenge to how we define history itself. In the discipline of archaeology, history is what we can see, touch, and measure. Ruins, artifacts, inscriptions, datable layers of soil. But in traditions like those that surround Dwarka, history is also what is remembered, held in story, preserved in ritual, passed down through generations not by writing but by telling. This distinction matters. For many in the academic world, the Mahabharata is viewed as mythology, a richly imagined work of literature full of symbolic meaning but not necessarily literal truth. Dwarka, in that view, is a setting, like Troy in Homer's epics, dramatic, meaningful, but ultimately invented. Yet others ask, what if these stories contain embedded memories? What if the city of Dwarka was real, perhaps not in the exact way described in sacred texts, but real enough that its memory endured even after its physical disappearance? This concept, that memory can preserve the outline of real places, is not unique to India. In Greece, the ruins of Mycenae and Knossos were long thought to be mythical until excavations proved otherwise. In Mesopotamia, the story of a great flood was once considered purely allegorical until geologists found evidence of ancient deluges that likely inspired it. So too with Dwarka. The city described in the Mahabharata may contain embellishments, but it may also preserve the geographical memory of a real coastal settlement, its location, its destruction, and its cultural importance. Oral tradition, in this light, becomes not a substitute for history, but a parallel archive, a different way of remembering. This convergence of archaeology and memory forces us to confront a deeper question. How do we know what is real? Is something real because it leaves behind walls and stones? Or is it real because it leaves behind stories, told and retold with such conviction that they shape lives long after the city itself has vanished? In Dwarka, both kinds of reality exist. There are ruins beneath the waves, there are sonar scans and stone anchors and radiocarbon dates, but there are also daily prayers, ceremonial offerings, and pilgrims believe they are walking in Krishna's footsteps. The city, in this sense, occupies multiple timelines. It is an ancient city remembered in scripture. It is a submerged archaeological site investigated by divers and researchers. It is a living town filled with rituals that have continued for centuries. And it is a city of the mind, imagined and reimagined by artists, poets, devotees, and scholars, each drawing from different truths. This multiplicity does not dilute Dwarka's significance, it enriches it. It reminds us that the past is not fixed, it is negotiated between evidence and belief, between science and story, between what we can measure and what we choose to remember. In the end, Dwarka is as much about what was lost as about what remains. It is about impermanence and how human beings try to make meaning from what time takes away. That is why, even today, the name Dwarka resonates so strongly. It speaks to our longing for continuity, for a world where the divine and the human once lived together, where cities were not just structures but expressions of cosmic harmony. Dwarka endures because it touches something universal, the desire to connect with a past that feels deeper than history, older than records, and closer than we expect. In the final chapter, we return to the question we began with. What does it mean for a city to be remembered, even when it is gone? And what does Dwarka teach us about how we, as a civilization, remember across oceans, through centuries, and beyond the boundaries of time? Chapter 9. Beneath the shifting tides of the Arabian Sea, off the western coast of India, something ancient sleeps. Stones lie scattered on the seabed, some carved, some aligned, some eroded beyond recognition. They do not speak. They do not rise to meet the sky as temples once might have. But they remain, and that, perhaps more than anything else, is the story of Dwarka. It is a story not only about what once was, but about how we remember. The Mahabharata tells us that Dwarka was built in a time of divine intervention, ruled by a god and lost when that god departed the earth. The ocean, it is said, rose to reclaim what man could not preserve. It swallowed palaces and marketplaces, temples and homes, and yet the story lived on, not just in books or scrolls, but in song, in prayer, in ritual, passed down from teacher to student, parent to child, pilgrim to pilgrim. For generations, the city existed not on maps, but in memory. There is something deeply human in this. Throughout history, great cities have risen and fallen. Babylon, Carthage, Mohenjo-daro. Some were lost to war, some to drought, others to the slow erosion of time. But only a few have remained so present in the minds of the descendants, long after their physical traces disappeared. Dwarka belongs to that rare category, not just a lost city, but a remembered one. A city that refused to vanish from cultural consciousness. In recent decades, archaeology has tried to find the city in stone and sediment. Marine surveys have traced outlines. Divers have collected anchors. Pottery shards have been analyzed. Some of what they have found aligns with legend. Some remains uncertain. And some resists explanations altogether. But even as scientists work to define the historical Dwarka, a parallel truth persists. A city doesn't need to be entirely excavated to be real. If it lives in the stories people tell, if it shapes the rituals they perform, if it guides their understanding of time and morality and belonging, then it lives in ways that no sonar scan or carbon date can fully capture. Walk the ghats of modern Dwarka at dawn, and you will see this firsthand. Pilgrims descend stone steps into the Gomti River. They offer flowers, light lamps, whisper prayers. Many believe they are bathing at the very site where Krishna once walked. Some carry water back to their homes hundreds of kilometers away. Others simply stand in silence, watching the current flow into the sea. None of them question whether the city is real. For them, it always has been. In this sense, Dwarka is a case study in the power of cultural memory, a reminder that the past does not survive only in physical remains, it survives in meaning, in faith, in the stories we choose to preserve and the places we continue to honor. And perhaps that is why the story of Dwarka continues to matter, not just to scholars or spiritual seekers, but to anyone who has ever wondered what becomes of the things we lose. Not every city can be fully excavated, not every ruin will yield answers, but some places linger, some names endure, some memories refuse to fade. And ever so often, the sea, silent for centuries, recedes just far enough to reveal what it has kept hidden: a stone, a staircase, a clue. Dwarka is more than a lost city, it is a mirror held up to our relationship with time, faith, and the unknown. It reminds us that history is not a closed book, it is a conversation between what we find, what we believe, and what we imagine. In the end, perhaps Dwarka's greatest legacy is this: that a city once described in verses, submerged by waves, doubted by many, and sought by divers and devotees alike, can still inspire us to look beneath the surface, not only of oceans, but of the past itself.